The clock read 6:45. The kettle had just begun to whisper on the stove. Claire stood still, unmoving, as if her body was there out of habit, but her soul was somewhere else, lost in a time that no longer existed. Every day began like this. The same mechanical sequence: water in the kettle, flame lit, the same blue cup with a crack on the rim, the same chamomile tea, but there was an absence louder than any sound. She didn't cry anymore, didn't scream. That part had burned out in the early years, when grief was sharp, wild, unbearable. Now it was just constant, quiet, like background music only she could hear. The kettle whistled. Claire turned off the flame, poured the water over the tea bag, and sat down. She wouldn't drink the tea. She never did. It was a ritual, a gesture to balance a world that had lost its center. On the wall, taped with old yellowing adhesive, still hung a child's drawing. A boy in a superhero cape. Ethan, 4 years old, written in smudged blue pen. That worn piece of paper was her shrine, more sacred than any cross, more final than any gravestone. It was April 14th, always the same day. 14 years since the fire. 14 years since she heard that scream. 14 years since they buried an empty coffin with his name engraved in gold, but no body inside. Nothing left, no clothes, no toys. Just ashes and silence. Claire stood, opened a kitchen drawer. Inside, a small wooden box. Locked. The key was on the necklace she never took off. With trembling fingers, she unlocked it. Inside was a tiny silver baby bracelet, Ethan engraved in delicate letters, and a letter written to him, never mailed. Every year, she wrote a new one, told him what she had done, how she was. Small things: the book she read, the movie that made her think of him, a smell on the street that stopped her breath. And every letter ended the same: if you're out there, find me. I'll be waiting. Same place, always. Claire folded the new letter gently, placed it in the box with the others, and left. The street was quiet. The city was just waking. The sun wrestled with heavy clouds. The world moved on. But her time had stopped that day, the day he left, or maybe the day they took him from her. She walked to the bus stop, like every April 14th, got off 3 stops later, climbed the hill to the old neighborhood, stood before the burnt gate of the house where they had once built a life, where Ethan had taken his first steps, heard his first story, where everything ended, but Claire never stopped coming. Some people found it strange. Others looked at her with pity and turned away. She didn't care. She sat among the ruins, looked at the charred walls, the floor where bits of tile, melted dolls, and the wreckage of a childhood gone too soon still lay. She closed her eyes and listened, because sometimes, deep down, she still heard his voice. "Mommy, look at me." And then the wind would blow, and she pretended it was him answering. She stayed there for hours. Sometimes she slept. Sometimes she just breathed. Sometimes she wrote another letter. But this year, something changed. When Claire returned home, the sun was setting. The sky painted orange and gray. She placed her bag on the table, took off her coat, and walked to the kitchen. The kettle still had water. She thought about making tea again. Then she saw it. An envelope. White. No stamp. No sender. Just her name. Written in simple blue ink. A man's handwriting. Claire froze. The world tilted. Her hands began to sweat. She opened it. Inside, a photo. Of a young man. Brown hair. Deep eyes. And the impossible, that same scar above his left eyebrow. That slight tilt of the head. That gaze. She dropped to her knees. The envelope slipped from her hands. The photo glided across the floor. On the back, Just one sentence tomorrow. 3:45 p.m. Platform 7. Claire clutched her chest. She didn't know what to think, what to feel. Was it a delusion? A cruelty? A sign? Or was it him? She wept. For the first time in years, her tears felt different. It wasn't pain. It was hope. And after everything, that hurt even more. Gabriel had never truly known where he came from. His name, he knew, was chosen by his adoptive parents, Alice and Thomas, a kind middle-aged couple who took him in when he was just 2 years old. Since then, he had lived in a small town, surrounded by trees, silence, and unanswered questions. He didn't remember the face of his biological mother, not the sound of her voice. All he had were dreams, dreams that burned. They always started the same: a crib surrounded by smoke, a red light blinking like an alarm, and a scream short, sharp, muffled. Gabriel would wake up sweating, chest tight, hands trembling. It had happened since he was 8. But recently, something had shifted. Now, the dream came every night, and it was clearer. He saw a woman in a white dress running through a hallway. The dress was stained with soot. She screamed a name, but the sound always vanished before the end. There was fire, so much fire. But what shook him most was the look in that woman's eyes. It was as if she saw him, as if she was begging him not to disappear. And then he would wake up. Gabriel tried to ignore it at first, thought it was just trauma without a name, a residue of adoption. But one night, after the 3rd consecutive dream, he got out of bed, opened his laptop, and typed "fire adoption, 2008 missing babies." Most results were irrelevant. But one link stood out: mystery: an old neighborhood baby, presumed dead in house fire. He clicked. His heart raced. The article described a fire in a suburban neighborhood. April 2008. The house had been destroyed. The mother, Claire Weller, had survived. But the baby, Ethan, just 14 months old, was presumed dead. No body had ever been found. Gabriel froze. The name, Ethan. There was an old photo, a young woman holding a baby. The image was slightly blurred, but something stirred deep inside him. A memory without shape, but with a scent. The smell of her hair. The sound of laughter. He closed the laptop and knew he needed to find out who he was. The next day, he went to the records office where his adoptive parents had filed for guardianship. He asked for access to the documents, said he wanted to know more about his history, that it mattered to his identity. The clerk hesitated, but moved by the sincerity in his eyes, agreed. Among the paperwork was an old address, faded but still legible. A rough neighborhood, Rua das Palmeiras. Gabriel wrote it down. He went back home, but didn't tell anyone. Not Alice, not Thomas. Not because he didn't trust them, but because he didn't want to hurt them. He needed clarity. He needed to know if any of it made sense, if it wasn't just madness born of a boy with no answers. That night, the dream returned, but something new happened. This time, he saw the bracelet, silver, with a name engraved: Ethan. When he woke up, he knew exactly what he had to do. The following Saturday, he took a train to the next city, then a bus to the indicated neighborhood. When he stepped off, his heart was pounding like he was about to run a marathon. He walked slowly down Rua das Palmeiras. Some houses had been renovated, others abandoned. There was a feeling of something forgotten, and then he saw it. A lot surrounded by faded caution tape, remnants of walls, burned bricks, the smell of time. He didn't know why, but his feet carried him to the center of the lot. He stood there, closed his eyes, and felt it. It was here. He didn't know how, but it was, as if his bones remembered, as if the ground still carried the sound of footsteps from someone who once ran to save him. as if this place still knew his name. Gabriel took a deep breath. His eyes filled with tears. He had no proof, no certainty, but he had instinct. A memory not from the mind, but from the body. And in that moment, he decided he would return the next day. At the same time as in his dream, 3:45 p.m. Maybe, just maybe, someone else would return too. The sky hung heavy that morning. Dark clouds blanketed the city like a thick quilt, muffling the light and sound. Claire walked through the streets with slow, almost ceremonial steps. In her pocket, she carried the silver bracelet, polished smooth from years of being held. Every year, on the same date, she returned to the same place, like someone visiting a grave with no headstone. But on that April 15th, something felt different. A subtle restlessness, as if time itself were holding its breath. She arrived at the scorched lot at 3:10 p.m., sat on a stone that remained from what had once been the front steps. Her hands rested on her knees, eyes fixed on nothing. The bracelet between her fingers. For several minutes, she simply listened. The wind passed through the ruins as if it still knew the way. There was a silence there that wasn't empty. It was full of memories. Claire closed her eyes and remembered. She remembered the last night with Ethan. He had a mild fever, and she sang him a soft lullaby, the same her mother once sang to her. He clutched her finger tightly, as if he knew the world was too unstable. "You'll be strong," she had whispered that night. "You'll grow up and remember me, even if the world tries to erase us." She never forgot the warmth of that tiny hand, nor the sweet smell of his skin after a bath. That's what came to her mind among the rubble, a time that would never return, but also never left her. Then, a sound. Footsteps, slow, cautious. Claire didn't turn immediately. Her heart raced without permission. It wasn't unusual for curious people to pass by, but these steps, they carried weight. Hesitation, like someone walking on memories. She turned her head and saw him, a young man, maybe 17, brown hair, fair skin, intense eyes. He stood at the edge of the lot, looking around like someone who had been there before, even if he never had. Claire said nothing, just watched. The boy stepped forward, as if guided by something invisible. He stopped a few meters from her, looked around, then his gaze settled on her. Not directly, but like someone recognizing an echo. "This place," he murmured, almost to himself. "It feels like I've been here." Claire swallowed hard. Her hands tightened around the bracelet without realizing it. "What brought you here?" she asked softly. He hesitated, looked at the ground, then at her. "I don't know. I had dreams. Dreams of fire, of a woman, and this street. I thought it was crazy. But yesterday, I found an old address in my adoption records. It was this one." Claire stayed still. Her face showed nothing, but inside, everything trembled. "What's your name?" she asked. Gabriel, silence. The name meant nothing, but his eyes, they said everything. She stood slowly, approached. There was something familiar in his way of walking, in his slightly tilted posture. But it was impossible. So many years, so many variables. "I had a son," she said. "He died here. Or, they said he did." Gabriel remained silent. Then he pulled something from his pocket. An old photograph, the same one Claire had in her box. Torn at the corner, but original. This came with the adoption papers. I never knew what it was. Only recently did I think. Maybe it was a clue. Claire took the photo with trembling hands. It was her, young, holding Ethan. "Where did you get this?" Her voice cracked. "I don't know. It was in an envelope with my name. I never understood why." She looked at him as if time was collapsing. The eyes, that scar above his left eyebrow, the way he tilted his head slightly when hearing something important. Claire reached for her necklace, took it off, opened the tiny box, pulled out the bracelet. This was his. She extended the object. Gabriel took it, turned it over. Ethan. For a moment, everything stopped. The wind died. Time froze. "I remember this," he murmured. "I remember that name." Claire couldn't hold back. A tear fell, then another, and then she stepped forward, touched his face. "Ethan?" she whispered. He didn't answer with words. He simply let her embrace him. And there among ruins, two worlds collided, not with an explosion, but with a silence, full of life. The world seemed to pause around them. Claire and Gabriel, or was it Ethan, remained in an embrace, as if time had lost all urgency. The wind returned slowly, whispering through the trees and gently stirring her hair. It was as though even nature had bowed to that reunion. Claire breathed in his scent. Though his face now belonged to a teenager, something in him hadn't changed. An essence, a touch, a warmth only a mother could recognize. Gabriel, eyes wet, pulled back slightly. Both were trembling, yet there was a newfound steadiness in his gaze, as if everything was finally beginning to make sense. "I don't understand how," he began, but she cut in. "Do you remember anything? Even just a sound? A smell?" He took a deep breath. "I remember a song, a soft melody repeated, and a voice, low but strong, calling me my little love." Claire smiled through her tears. "That's what I used to call you." She pulled a folded piece of paper from her pocket, that year's letter, handed it to him. "I wrote one of these every year. I never thought anyone would read them, but I couldn't stop." Gabriel opened it gently. Read in silence. His eyes welled with emotion at every line. The words were simple, ordinary, yet carried a love that spanned time and absence. "I always felt like something was missing," he said, voice thick. "Alice and Thomas are wonderful, but there was a hole. And now it has a name," Claire finished. She took out the old photo and showed it to him, alongside another from when he was little, an image she kept in an old envelope. The resemblance was undeniable. And there, among proofs and emotion, their defenses fell. "Ethan," she called, tasting the name after so many years. He didn't respond immediately, but something in his expression softened, as if he accepted it. "I don't know how I ended up in adoption, but if you want, we can find out together." Claire nodded. "I'm not losing you again." They sat side by side. The sun began to set, casting golden light over the ruins. The bracelet was still in his hand. He slipped it onto his wrist, though it fit tightly. "I want to keep this," he said. "It's part of who I am." She ran her hand through his hair. He smiled shyly. And in that moment, past and present aligned. Claire knew there were still questions. Documents, hidden truths, maybe even people who needed to answer. But for now, this was enough. She had him, and he had her. In the end, from the ashes, a new beginning rose. The name she hadn't dared to say now echoed freely among the wreckage. Ethan had come home. The sunset painted the sky in shades of gold and red as Claire and Ethan sat side by side among the ruins of the past. The silence that surrounded them was unlike any other silence they had known. It was full of presence, of unspoken truths, of a love that, though forgotten, had never stopped existing. Ethan looked around as if trying to recognize a distant memory. The place that once appeared in dreams now stood before him, concrete, warm, and real. The scent of charred wood still lingered in the air, and as painful as it was, there was a strange peace in being there, as if he had finally found the missing piece inside himself. "You know it's strange?" he said, breaking the silence. "I've always been afraid of fire. Always. But now, here. I'm not scared. I feel like it's part of my story." Claire nodded. Her gaze was on the ground, but her mind wandered through memories. The fire tried to erase everything. "But it didn't succeed," she said. "Your name survived in me. Every day, even without knowing where you were, I repeated it in my heart, like a mantra, like a prayer." Ethan turned to her. "You never stopped looking for me?" She shook her head. "Never. Even when they said it was impossible. Even when they called me crazy. I felt it." Here she placed her hand on her chest, "that you were still breathing somewhere." The young man stayed silent for a few seconds, then pulled from his pocket the letter he had read earlier. This time, he read it aloud. "If you're out there, find me. I'll be waiting. Same place. Always." Claire closed her eyes tightly, trying to hold back tears. "And you came," she whispered. Ethan didn't respond with words. He simply reached out and took her hand. Their fingers intertwined as if they had never been apart. They stayed like that for a few minutes. Time no longer mattered. The unanswered questions, how he ended up in another city, who gave him away, why no one ever searched, would be discovered later. In that moment, the reunion was enough. Then he hugged her again. This time with strength, with presence, with everything 14 years of absence had held back. Claire wrapped her arms around him, as if protecting the entire world. She cried silently, resting her head on his shoulder. It was the same scent, the same warmth, the same feeling. People passed by on the street. Some looked, others hurried along. But none of them could comprehend the miracle happening there. Two broken souls, finally whole. "I don't know what the future holds," Ethan said, "but I want to stay close. I want to know who I am. With you around." Claire nodded, moved. "And I want to get to know you again, to know who you've become, to hear about your life, your fears, your dreams." The sky had darkened. The city lights began to flicker on. But there, in that forgotten lot, a new flame was igniting. Not the kind that destroys, but the kind that warms. The kind that is reborn. The next day, the world already felt different. Claire prepared breakfast with careful, almost ceremonial hands. The sound of the kettle heating, the smell of toast, and the shy sun entering through the window all seemed like ordinary details. But for her, they were signs of rebirth. Ethan sat at the table, watching every gesture from his mother, as if rediscovering a forgotten language. It was strange being there, in a new place that still felt familiar. The house's walls displayed framed photos, old letters, and objects that seemed to have been silently waiting for him. "Did you live here before the fire?" he asked. Claire shook her head, smiling. "No, this house came afterward. I couldn't bear to return to that neighborhood. But I brought everything that was ours with me. Every object, every memory, as if I were waiting for you." Ethan ran his fingers along a frame with a handwritten letter. The handwriting was familiar, the same as the note that had guided him there. "This was the letter you wrote on my 10th birthday?" "Yes, I remembered your age, even without knowing if you were still alive. Sometimes I'd close my eyes and imagine what would he be like today? What would his laugh sound like? His walk, his taste in music?" Ethan smiled. "I like alternative rock, and I always walk fast. My adoptive dad said it was like I was trying to outrun the wind." Claire laughed, moved. "That sounds just like you." After breakfast, they sat on the living room couch. The silence between them now felt comfortable, though it carried questions. "Claire, can I call you Mom?" She looked at him, eyes shimmering. "My love, you can call me whatever your heart wants. But Mom, that's what I've always been. He held her hand. Then, Mom, you never found out how I disappeared? Claire took a deep breath. The pain was still there, raw. I remember the smoke, screaming your name, running to your crib, but when I got there, it was empty. Everything happened so fast. They told me the fire's heat could have consumed everything, that there was nothing left. But something inside me said otherwise. Ethan nodded. And afterward? No one gave you answers? Just silence. The official report said you were in the house, that survival was impossible. But there was no body. No clothes, no evidence. Only absence. Ethan paused for a moment. Could someone have taken me? He murmured, what if someone wanted to erase me from your life? Claire swallowed hard. I thought about that so many times, but I didn't have the strength to investigate. I was alone, devastated, and no one seemed willing to reopen the case. And now? Now I have you, and with you, I have courage. He nodded. He took a folder with his adoption documents. There were names, stamps, signatures, and one name in particular, highlighted Santa Eliza Institute. That's the shelter where they took me, according to the records, Ethan said. And this signature here, it looks just like the one on the envelope I got a few weeks ago. Claire picked up the document. Her eyes froze. This handwriting, I know it, you do? It's from my brother-in-law, your father's brother. They drifted apart before you were born. I always distrusted him. He thought I was too weak to be a mother. Ethan looked surprised. You think he? Claire shook her head, battling the thought. I don't know, but if he had something to do with this, I need to know. We need to know. Ethan clutched the bracelet on his wrist, gripped it tightly. We'll go to the end, Mom. Together, that afternoon, the two left home heading for the Santa Eliza Institute. The sky was clear, but inside them, the atmosphere was tense, filled with expectation. And one question echoing between them, what really happened on April 15th, 14 years ago? And who profited from the silence? The Santa Eliza Institute was an old building with high walls and rusted gates, hidden among narrow and quiet streets. Claire and Ethan stopped in front of the gate. The atmosphere there was heavy, dense as if the walls held stories no one dared to tell. Ready? Claire asked, holding his hand tightly. Ethan nodded, ready. They were greeted by a stern-looking woman who introduced herself as Sister Madalena. Her eyes, however, softened when Claire explained why they were there. We're looking for answers about an old case, Claire said. His name was Ethan Weller. He was declared dead in a fire, but survived, and was adopted. We're trying to understand how this happened. The nun's eyes widened. Ethan? One moment, she disappeared behind a wooden door. Minutes later, she returned with a box of old files. Inside were dusty records, fragile with age. She placed them on a table and began to search. Many of the records from that period were lost or corrupted, but here, she pulled out a form with familiar handwriting. Claire grabbed the paper and upon seeing the signature, felt her stomach twist. It's him, Marcos Weller, my husband's brother. He delivered the baby personally, Sister Madalena said, reviewing the files. He claimed the mother was dead, said the boy was an orphan and needed a new home. Claire staggered back. Ethan caught her arm. He knew. He knew I was alive, she said, voice trembling with contained fury. He took you from me. Why? Ethan asked, sitting down. What did he gain from this? Claire closed her eyes, trying to remember. Then, like a puzzle piece clicking into place, something surfaced. He was always jealous of his brother. Thought I wasn't good enough. Once, before the wedding, he tried. She paused. He tried to kiss me. Said if I rejected him, I'd regret it someday. Ethan's eyes widened. You think this was revenge? Or obsession? or both. Sister Madalena gathered the papers. We have the record of the drop-off, but nothing else. After that, the process was handled by a private adoption agency. You might want to look them up. It's called Veritas Foundation. Claire jotted down the name. They thanked her and left the institute in silence. The world outside felt colder. On the way back, Ethan broke the silence. He stole a life with you from me, stole from both of us. But now, we have the truth. Claire looked at him firmly. And we'll see this through. We'll expose this. He won't keep hiding in the shadow of silence. The sun was setting again. But this time, it didn't feel like an end. It felt like purpose, like direction. They had the name behind the lie. And now, they had a new goal: justice. The Veritas Foundation building was modern, a sharp contrast to the old Santa Eliza Institute. Claire and Ethan climbed the marble steps with firm strides. Inside, they weren't just looking for answers. They were seeking justice. They were welcomed by a friendly receptionist who quickly led them to a social worker named Luciana. She greeted them kindly, but her expression hardened when she heard the name Marcos Weller. Did something happen? Claire asked, noticing the change. Luciana hesitated. Then she stood up and quietly closed the door. I can't give too much information without a court order, but if you truly are the biological parents involved in this case, maybe it's time someone listened to the whole story. She walked over to a file cabinet, pulled out a thick envelope, and placed it on the desk. This case was always odd. Mr. Weller brought the child with all the proper documents. Death certificate of the mother, hospital report of the fire. Everything looked legitimate. But there was something in his eyes, something that bothered me for years. Claire's eyes widened. And why didn't anyone say anything? Because no one wanted to hear it. I was young, fresh out of school. I did what I could. I noted everything, kept extra copies, and flagged the case for special observation. But after that, it was all shelved. She handed the file to Claire. These are the original documents. There are signatures, dates, false declarations. And there's a copy of a medical report. With a critical note, the mother was never admitted to the hospital. What do you mean? Ethan asked, confused. The record he submitted claimed you had died at the hospital. But this report proves you were never admitted. In other words, it was all forged. Claire took a deep breath. The pain pulsed again, but now it was accompanied by outrage. For years, I screamed in the dark. No one heard me. No one believed me. Luciana touched her hand. Now they will. I can help initiate a legal case. We have enough to reopen it and hold those responsible accountable. Ethan squeezed his mother's arm. This changes everything. It does, Claire said. Because now, my voice isn't alone anymore. As they stepped outside, Claire paused on the sidewalk. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The scream that had been trapped in her throat for years was finally starting to echo. And this time, the world was ready to hear it. The formal complaint against Marcos Weller was filed 3 weeks after the visit to the Veritas Foundation. The case quickly spread through local newspapers, drawing attention from neighbors, lawyers, and even people who swore they had always suspected something. Claire and Ethan now spent their days between meetings with the lawyer, searching for new documents, and in the rare moments of respite, trying to rebuild the lost bond. The time between mother and son, still fresh, was precious. Every conversation, every shared meal felt like a small victory against the years of silence. But the reunion was still an open wound, and justice, though close, brought with it the shadow of confrontation. It was on a gray morning that the past finally knocked at the door. Literally. Claire was making tea in the kitchen when she heard 3 firm knocks. Ethan ran to the door, and upon opening it, froze. It was him, Marcos Weller. Older, gray-haired, cold expression, but his eyes, Still the same. Hard. Icy. Claire approached slowly. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steadier than she expected. Marcos looked at Ethan, then at her. "I came to ask you to stop this. It's all in the past. No one needs to know." Ethan stepped forward. "You stole me from my mother, stole her motherhood, and now you want silence?" Marcos raised his voice. "I saved you." That woman was unstable. She never accepted she wasn't fit to be a mother. Claire trembled, but she didn't back down. "Unstable? I spent years looking for my son, writing letters to no one, sleeping with a bracelet in my hand. The only unstable one here is you." Marcos took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "You don't understand. I did what I thought was right. My brother was dead. I tried to protect the family." "You protected yourself," Ethan said. "And now you'll pay for that." Marcos stared at them. For the first time, something faltered in his face. Fear? Regret? It was hard to tell. He turned away. "You won't get anything. This will drag on for years." Claire stepped closer. "I waited 14. I can wait longer." The door closed firmly. Silence returned, but it wasn't the same as before. Now it was a silence of strength, from someone who no longer feared. The next day, their lawyer filed for preventive detention. The evidence gathered was enough. The past had knocked at the door, and Claire finally knocked back. It was Ethan's first birthday since the reunion. Claire had spent the entire week preparing the house. She placed flowers on the porch, hung old and new photos on the walls, and made his favorite dish, eggplant lasagna, which he had mentioned casually days earlier. It was the kind of detail only a mother would notice. The table was set. Candles lit. Soft lighting filled the room. Ethan came down the stairs with his hair still damp, wearing a shirt Claire had kept all these years, a gift he had never received. "Do you remember this?" she asked. He smiled. "No, but it feels like it's always been mine." They sat at the table. Conversation flowed easily. Music, movies, bits of his teenage years, stories from her life he had never heard. The pain still lingered in a few pauses, but it no longer controlled the moment. "I never thought I'd get to live this," Claire said, looking at him tenderly. "A birthday dinner, with you here." Ethan took a deep breath. "Me neither. But now, I want to live everything we missed." After dinner, she brought out a simple cake, made with care. On top, instead of numbered candles, there was just one word, Ethan. He fell silent for a few seconds. "No one's called me that since I was a baby. I've only been Gabriel. But now, that name feels different." "It feels true." Claire smiled. "Because it is your name. And now it's spoken again, without fear." He blew out the candle, and in the silence that followed, an unspoken wish hung in the air that time, at last, would be kind. Later, sitting on the porch, Ethan looked up at the sky. The stars had started to appear. Claire sat beside him, a blanket around her shoulders. "Are you still afraid of fire?" she asked. He thought for a moment. "No, not anymore. Because now I know I survived, and that the fire didn't take everything." She looked at him with pride. "No, the fire only hid things. But now, everything's coming back." And between laughter, memories, and comforting silences, Ethan realized sometimes what was taken from us returns even stronger. And the name he thought he had lost was spoken again with love. Some stories don't end with periods. They end with ellipses. Because what is rebuilt never returns to what it was. And sometimes that's the best possible outcome. Claire and Ethan moved forward, not as perfect mother and son, but as two survivors of silence, pain, and time. Slowly, they rediscovered each other in simple gestures, a shared cup of tea, A walk in the park, an old song playing while they cooked together. Justice was served. Marcos Weller was convicted of identity fraud, kidnapping, and document forgery. But Claire knew the real victory wasn't in court. It was in being able to call her son by his name and be heard. Ethan, in turn, chose to keep both names Gabriel and Ethan. One represented what he had lived, the other what he had found again. Their story wasn't easy, but it was real. And above all, it was driven by something that fire, time, and silence could never destroy: love. Because true love never fades.